Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Dr Megan Woods.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's my pleasure to take a call on the third reading of this bill and to continue Labour's support for this piece of legislation, just in case there are any questions in your mind, Minister. Our position has been very clear right from the beginning with this piece of legislation when it came to the House for its first reading, that this had to be a piece of legislation that fulfilled the desire that is clearly evident in Christchurch for a locally led recovery. And Mr Speaker, we listened very carefully at the Select Committee stage, and in addition to the people that the Minister has acknowledged, I'd like to acknowledge the people who took the opportunity to submit on this piece of legislation and to come and present very ably their views to the Select Committee, because I think there was some very good thinking that lay in these submissions and gave us the basis for many of the changes that we were subsequently able to make to this bill. Because, Mr Speaker, it has been traversed on many occasions that when the bill was first reported back from Select Committee, Labour wasn't able to support this bill. We drew a very simple line in the sand, and that line in the sand was, did this deliver the kind of locally led recovery that the people of Christchurch desired, deserved and needed for their city to be all it could be? And the answer for us was no. But I would like to acknowledge the Minister and his willingness to work afterwards across parties to reach a point where we could all agree on the final shape of this bill that we are debating here in the House. So we are thankful for the government for doing that. While we're acknowledging people, I'd like to acknowledge some of the work that has gone on at the grassroots in Christchurch over the last 5.5 years. I think we have seen a remarkable 5.5 years, one I hope we'll never see the likes of again in my city, but the kind of creativity and innovation that has sprung up in the adversity that has been Christchurch and Canterbury over the last 5.5 years is something that I will always celebrate, and I know that many people across this House will celebrate. And this was always our vision, Mr Speaker, that what we have for the next phase of our regeneration would be a structure that could capture and allow for this innovation, this creativity and this energy that lay within the people of Christchurch and Canterbury to be what took us forward into the next 5.5 years, and not a heavy top-down Wellington approach. So I am thankful that we do have a bill that can do that. I'd also like to acknowledge the work of the advisory board that the Minister mentioned, ably chaired by the Right Honourable Jenny Shipley, that came forward with a good structure in which we could put in place this legislation. The Minister has given a good description of what this legislation does do. It seems somewhat counterintuitive to be saying this complex web of institutions that we are setting up to replace the one government organisation of Sarah are what we believe is going to take Christchurch forward in a faster and better way towards the kind of city we could be, but I believe it will. What we're going to see is a joint venture, a power sharing between the city and the government in the case of Christchurch City. And I would like to acknowledge the Mayor of Christchurch City, who's in the gallery today, to oversee the third reading of this bill for the work that she has put into this legislation. Because it is going to be through relationships, not only with Christchurch City, but with Selwyn District and Waimakariri District, that we are going to see productive moving forward in our region. And it's with the other strategic partners, with Ngāi Tahu and with ECAN, that we can make the most of what the next 5 years will bring. And I hope they do bring some more movement, some faster movement on those anchor projects, Minister. That is something that we do share, and I wait with bated breath for the forthcoming announcements around those. I'm breathing through my nose, Minister, and waiting. But one of the things that we're setting up, not only this joint venture between the City and the Crown, but as the Minister outlined, there is also another Crown entity that is going to take control of the residential red zone and the anchor projects in the form of Otakaro Limited. And this, as the Minister has alluded to, also will be subject to normal public finance reporting requirements and scrutiny from this House. And Mr Speaker, at the committee stage of this bill, we did raise some questions around the constitution of that company and the limits that need to be monitored in terms of that company and the way in which it operates. Because, Mr. Speaker, where we have got now is a very useful structure for how we can take our city and our region forward. But what it requires now is an operationalisation. And as I've been saying to many of the grassroots organisations in Christchurch, your job is not done. Your job is not complete here. We have a good piece of legislation, but we still need community involvement more than ever. We still need that level of engagement, we still need that level of creativity, and we still need the level of vigilance that we've seen from the community in Christchurch over their future for the next 5 years as we enter this new phase of our regeneration. And that is something that the Labour Party will commit to do for the next year and a bit that it's in opposition. It will continue to be vigilant in holding the government to account. But these are structures that can work if we all work together and work for the betterment of our city. We heard from many submitters in the course of the Select Committee process of this, but there was one reoccurring theme that just kept coming through time and time again, and that was around the time for local leadership. We heard from the Option 3 group that managed to get more than 100 submissions into the process in what was a very tight time frame, but that group managed to get more than 100 submissions in. We heard from Keep Our Assets, Avon Otakaro Network, all for the want for a greater cooperation between central and local government. And I hope that they can find that this legislation fulfills their expressions and their submissions to an extent. I'm also very pleased that the government has chosen to support the supplementary order paper in my name, so we can put in place those protections for Hagley Park. We can put a symbolic kind of protection around it and say generations of people before us have established this and protected it, and that it is our turn to do the same now. And I know that it is something that many people in Christchurch are very appreciative of, because it is such an important part of our city. Because, Mr. Speaker, we now face a very challenging 5 years ahead of us. We've gone through a challenging 5.5 years, but the next 5 years are also going to be very challenging. We still have many things to do if we're going to call our recovery a success. Many of these things to do are organisations that are charged under this legislation. And one of the changes that we got at Select Committee that I'm very pleased to see is that this legislation, unlike the Local Government Act, has the 4 well-beings in its purpose. So this is about the environmental, the economic, the social and the cultural well-being of our city and our region. And it's only by bringing those 4 elements together that we can have our city reach its potential. So I'm very happy to see those in there. We have a number of things to do. We still have a lot of very vacant land in our central city. And I think that anyone that's taken a ride through what used to be central Christchurch in recent time will see some exciting new developments that are springing up, and something that we all treasure and that we all look forward to seeing the next new things springing up. But I think we'll also see room for improvement, that there are many areas that we simply have to get going, that we cannot have wastelands sitting in the middle of our city and our suburbs that just sit there and haven't been touched in 5.5 years. I was heartened to read in the Minister's favourite newspaper, The Press, earlier today that some movement on the Sydenham Heritage Church is going to happen, and the pile of rubble sitting on Brougham Street is going to move 5.5 years on. And I think we'll all heave a collective sigh of relief over that one. It is an eyesore and just down the road from my house. So I'm personally very grateful for that. But, Mr. Speaker, we cannot call the regeneration and the recovery of Christchurch a success until we have certainty and closure on the residential recovery of Christchurch. People still not knowing what is happening with their homes, what is happening with EQC and what is happening with their insurance cannot be allowed to go on. We cannot have people feeling that their city is on the right path while they still sit waiting and have sleepless nights not knowing what is happening with their very certainty and foundation in life. But Mr Speaker, Labour is happy to support this bill. We have a framework. It is now up to us to make this work. Thank you, Mr Speaker.